Hello there everyone and welcome to Corona In-Depth course. In the first episode, we are going over the basics like the render setup settings, the Corona UI, how to place a camera. You will learn the basics of environment lighting, how to use material libraries like Chaos Cosmos. You will learn about UVW mapping, and you will be able to set up a basic scene at the end. So let's dive in. First things first, let's open up the render setup and begin from there. You can press F10 on your keyboard or click on this button to open the render setup. Here, the target at the top determines which mode we are in. We are not going to change that for now. The next one is preset. This is where you can save and load your settings. That means any changes you make to the settings won't have to be done all over again for each project. You can save it and load it later. Next is the renderer. Here you can select which render engine we are going to work with. In this case, we are choosing Corona, but this will change anytime you load up your 3ds Max. So now that we are here, let's make it our default render engine so we don't have to change it every time. Select the Common tab and head down to the Assign Renderer tab. In the production, select Corona and select Save to Defaults. This will make it the default renderer. Back to the top. The following item is View to Render. This determines which view should be rendered when you hit the render button. You can lock it to a specific view or camera by selecting the view and hitting the lock button. Now we can start exploring the settings and learn what each tab does. It's good to know that the Common and the Render Elements tab are same across all render engines, but the other ones may change according to the render engine you choose. In the Common tab, you will see Time output at the top. Here you can choose whether to render a single image or a range of frames for animation. The area to render will decide which part of the view should be rendered. We can select a full view, a cropped view, or even select only an object to render for a quick edit. Output size determines the resolution for your render. There are some standard video and photography presets, but you can always select the custom option to change the image width, height, or aspect ratio as you want. Next, there are some options you will learn one by one in this course. For example, you can turn on and off all the displacements with just one click from here. The render output is to set a path for your outputs. We are not going to use this because we will use Corona Frame Buffer to save our renders. The next tab is the Scene tab. Here you can find some general settings and your environment lighting tab. In the general settings, you can open Frame Buffer, which is the window where you will see your renders come to life. You can start an interactive render, which is basically a live render, to see the changes we make in real time. You can set up a light mix here, which will collect all your lighting data so you can change it after the render, so it's a really cool option. You can open the material library from here and reset the settings. And here you can limit your render time using pass, noise, or time limit. Then you can save your render as a CXR, which is a format you can open later to resume the render or modify all your post-production work, as you do in the frame buffer. You can also resume a render from a file or from the last render. Next is render overrides, which is a handy option. This will apply a specific material to the entire scene. It's useful for the initial lighting phase. You will learn more about it soon. Then you can select your denoising algorithm. This is also important. And below that, you can choose whether you want your renders upscaled by AI for a quicker preview. It will basically render the image with half the resolution and doubles the size using AI. Here again, you can change what you want to render. At the end, you have your environment lighting tab, where you will assign the source to your natural lights or environment lights, like sun and sky or an HDRI image. The next tab is the camera tab, where you can change your camera settings, post-processing items like bloom and glare effects, or change the tone mapping. You can also play around with the camera settings individually in the modifier tab of each camera you make. Then there is the performance tab. Here, for example, you can change the advanced global illumination settings, which determines the algorithms the render engine uses to calculate the lights. There are some advanced options and they are already the best settings. Here you can see a clear message from the developers. Don't mess with this tab. So we are going to listen and move on to the next tab, which is System. Here you can see general settings for Corona. For example, you can lock 3ds Max during the rendering, set the auto save path for renders, change your frame buffer to the old version, and more. We will get into those later. Next, you can export Corona standalone files. You can open them later in other programs with Corona Render installed on them, or open them in Chaos Vantage. You can even start a live link to Chaos Vantage from here. There are also additional frame buffer settings, such as adding a stamp to your renders and changing the image filter. Next up is the render elements, where you can take extra information alongside your render to help you in post-production phase in Photoshop or similar apps. Now let's move on to the Corona toolbar. On the top, you can see two Corona camera icons. First one will place a camera, then you will change the angles. The second one will make a camera from your current perspective view. Then you can add lights from here, add sun and sky. Create a Corona proxy, which is a tool to make the heavy models look lighter and help you move faster around the scene. Add a decal option. A decal is basically an image projected onto your model. Next one is Corona Unified Lister, which gives you a complete list of Corona related items in the scene, like lights and cameras and proxies. This is a handy tool for managing complex scenes. Next is again related to the Corona proxy. Then you can open Corona Converter, which will help you convert, for example, an object with a V-Ray material to a Corona material without changing it. Next one is the Offline Material Library. This is going to be removed and merged with the following option, which is Chaos Cosmos. It's a really useful, extensive online library of 3D models, materials, HDRI, lights, and effects. Chaos Cosmos will be your best friend along the way, because you won't need to make each and every simple material from scratch every time. Below that, there is the Light Mix Setup button. You will learn this later. Then you can open your frame buffer also from here, or start an interactive render, or assign the interactive render window to one of your views in 3ds Max. Next is Resume Render. And below these you can see some extra options that are going to help you with Max related tasks, like randomizing objects or changing the pivots. You can learn these along the way. Now it's time to move on to the frame buffer, which will be the window that displays our render results. Here you can select the channels that you are viewing. This relates to the render elements I mentioned before. Then you can start interactive render, stop the render, and start your main render or progressive render from here. Next, you can see the zoom options. Select the focus point on the render for shots with depth of field. Here you can select a region to render, so you don't have to wait for the whole scene to render to see a tiny change or a small part of your scene. And you can copy your image using these, or save it as the format you want, like JPEG or PNG from here. Take note that the options with a small arrow beside them have extra options in them, so in order to see them, you need to just click on the arrow. The next tab is the post, where you do all the post-production work. This is getting pretty good these years. There will be almost no need to refine the image in Photoshop or similar apps. Next tab is the stats. This will show you information about the render, such as the noise amount or how much time has spent or remaining. Next is the history tab, where you can save your renders for quick before and after comparisons. DR is distributed rendering, that we are not going to use that. Next is light mix, where you can turn on and off and modify lights even after the render, as I mentioned before. You need to set this up because it won't work by default. And finally, the collab tab. There is also the material editor, where we will create our materials. You can hit M on your keyboard or open it by selecting this icon on the toolbar. You will learn more about this in the next episodes. To be able to make a render, we will need a 3D model as a base. Then we need to set up a camera. We need to turn on the lights. Then, of course, we need to make materials for the objects. Here, as you can see in 3ds Max, I have a base 3D model without any materials from 3ds Max. Here, as you can see, we have a teapot, a window, and a curtain. As you can see, when I move into the space, because the space is small, I get kind of stuck in between the walls and I cannot have a wide view. If you're encountering that, you can click on this button, which is the field of view, and by dragging your mouse on your viewport, you can increase and decrease it. So I'm going to increase the field of view a little bit to be able to make a camera. In order to make a camera, we have two options at the top of the Corona toolbar, as I mentioned before. By clicking the first one, you can create a camera from scratch. The first click will create the camera, and the second click will create the camera target. The camera target is where the camera is going to look. You can select other viewports for easier creation. For example, the top viewport, you can click to make the camera and drag around to change the camera target position. You can select them one by one and moving them around. You can select the camera, the target, or select both of them by clicking on the line in between them. And we can also use the second option to create a camera also. First, we can move around the space in the perspective view and set up our view, then select the second option. Here, as you can see, I'm in perspective view on the corner of my viewport. And once I click on the second option, you can see it will turn into a camera. Now, if I go back to the other views, 2D views, you can see that a camera has been made with the correct height and camera target. Now I would like to exit my camera and go back to my perspective view. I can just simply click on the corner of my viewport and select perspective, or you can press P on your keyboard. If you want to go back to your camera, you can also do the same and select the perspective, select the camera from the first rollout. Now we've done the first step, which is the camera creation. Let's see if we start a render, what will happen. You can start the render either from the render setup and clicking this button, or open the frame buffer, which is the better way, and click on this solid play button, which is going to start a progressive rendering. As you can see, everything is black. So this means that we have no light in the scene. I will stop the render using this button, and I will start making a simple environment light. To do that, we can head to the render setup and go to the scene tab. On the bottom, you can see scene environment. As you can see, 3ds Max environment tab is selected now. So basically, we have two environment tabs. One is for 3ds Max and one is for Corona. Select your viewport and press number 8 on your keyboard. This will open up the environment and effects tab. So we have two controls for environment. One is for 3ds Max and one is for Corona. There's not much difference on using which one of them, but I suggest using the Corona one under the render setup. By taking a look at the 3ds Max environment tab, you can see the color is black here and no map is also selected. So our source of light is this color. Now let's try changing the color and see the effect. Let's open up the color picker and then select the color. Let's run an interactive render. Select this play button, but the hollow one, which is the interactive render. This will help us see the live changes of the color. As you can notice, the color from here is now our environment lighting. Instead of a color, you can also use a map, for example an HDRI lighting, by selecting the map from here. Once again, it's better to use the Corona environment tab. Here you can select a single map. You will have the same controls like the color and the map selection. It will be a slightly better decision to use the Corona scene environment tab. So here I will select single map and I'm going to change the color also in here to show you the changes. And I can also change the color from here, as I mentioned before. And we can get out of the scene to see what is happening outside. So let's go to the perspective mode. Move out. Here we can notice two things. One, the viewport background has changed to blue. That's because we've changed the 3ds Max environment tab to a color. So we can turn it back to black and it will go to the default 3ds Max background. The next thing is the Corona environment light, which we've set to a red color, and as you can see, it is already surrounding our render. Now it's time to learn how to assign a map to our environment. But first, let's create a Corona sun. Here you can select the Corona sun in the toolbar, and by start clicking, then dragging up and down, you can create a sun, then create the altitude. Now if I start interactive render, you can see a harsh light, which is our sun, is shining on our 3D model. If I go inside, here you can see our sunlight. But as you can see, we don't have an environment yet. Like before, we are on 3ds Max environment tab and our environment is on a black color. So that's the reason. Now let's assign a map instead of a color to our environment. Go to the sun, select the sun source, then go to the modify tab, and here in the sun settings you can see an option for add a corona environment. Once you click that, it will automatically assign a corona environment map, which is actually a sky map, to our environment. If I go to the settings here, I actually don't see anything. And the reason is it is on 3ds Max environment. So as I said, I press 8 and here I can see it has assigned a corona sky map to our map slot here. But let's clear it from there and select our single map from the settings, then assign the map again. Now it will assign it to our corona environment tab because we were selecting the corona environment as our main environment tab. If I want to access the settings of the corona sky map, I should open it in the material library. So I open the material library, then click and drag my map from there to the material library. Here you can see on the right side, you can see the settings of the corona sky map. There is a setting for the intensity, so you can change the intensity of it. And the nice thing about the corona sky is that it is locked with the corona sun. So if I move around my sun, for example, getting it closer to my horizon, it will affect the corona sky also. They are kind of linked together, as you can see from here. The color from the sky will change according to the sun position. So if I move the sun below than the horizon line, it will obviously turn it to a night scene. So I'll always try to put it above the horizon line. Let's move inside and see what's happening. Here you can see we have a kind of sunset setup. So we have longer shadows here. And there might be some situations that you don't want the sun to shine directly into your scene. There are two options. You can either change the sun position to the opposite side of your window. So like this, you don't have a direct sunlight in your scene. Or you can go ahead to the sun settings again, select the sun source, go to the modify tab, and here just turn off the sun. So now we just have our environment lighting. Our sky map works also without the sun. It is linked to it, but if I turn off the sun, it won't turn off my environment tab. So before going further, let's try a good option. Instead of going in and out, as you can see, and switching between the perspective and the camera mode each time, I can lock my camera to my render tab, as I mentioned before, from here. If I go to the render setup, I can select my camera and hit the lock button, and this will lock this viewport with the camera to my render frame buffer. So as you can see here, this viewport has been locked to my render frame buffer. So I can move on to one of the other viewports, select that, change it to, for example, perspective, and then try to moving the sun around from there without changing the render view. Here, as you can see, I can move the sun again to the front side of the window. And you can see the results from the camera view in the render. So the thing is, that exact viewport is locked, not the camera. So if you move around in that specific viewport, you will still see the movement in the render. So you need to use the other three viewports. And now we can safely say that we have a basic lighting. So let's move on to the materials. As you can see here in our scene, we have some basic 3ds Max materials, and you can see how it affects our lighting. You can see the reflection of the purple and the bluish colors on the curtain or overall global illumination. So now let's add a material override to the scene. It will replace all of the materials with a white material that you are going to select. In order to do that, you can go to the Scene tab. Under the material override, you can check the material override and turn it on. But nothing happens because you need to assign a map to our material override. So I'm going to the material editor, right click on it, and under the materials, I can go to Corona and select the Corona Legacy or Corona Physical Material. Then I will click on this node and drag it over the render setup for the material override. And now you can see that our render turned to black. Why is that happening? If I go outside in the perspective view, I can see that the whole building turned to a white cube. And this white material is the material that we already created in the material editor. If I go inside, it will be blacked. The reason is the white material has been added to our glass also, so the light cannot pass the window. By clicking on the Preserve button in the material override, you can choose which materials not to be affected with Corona override. Here you can see Preserve Glass Material. If I check that, you can see my glass is turning back to being glass. So the light can pass the window. This will help us quickly isolate the glass materials to see the effect of the light in our scenes. Here you can see the before and after and see how the material override is affecting our scene. So now once again I'm going to lock my camera to the render and then go outside and play around with my lighting. Here you can see the effect of turning around the sun in my scene, and because it is a grayish material and it has no color, we can see the real color of our light. So the closer the sun is to horizon, the warmer the light you can see in the scene. As we learned before, we can add a Corona sky to our environment tab, and here we can see the effect of the Corona sky before and after. And we can turn off the sun to once again see the Corona sky effect only. You can see it's a bluish color. Here I can change the intensity of my sun. And if I want to modify the Corona sky intensity and settings, I can once again drag my Corona environment to the material tab and make it instanced. So the changes that we make will affect the same map in the environment. And here I can change the intensity. If I increase it, you can see more of that bluish color of the sky in our scene. Let's turn off the sun to see the effect better. This will help us brighten some dark areas. Now we learned how to set up our sun, and now we've learned how to set up our sun, change the intensity of the sun, also how to set up our sky, and with our material override we can see the light colors in our scene better. There is something you might notice already, and that is when we hit interactive render, it won't stop. So it will basically denoise the render for unlimited time. If we go to the setting under the scene, you can see the progressive render limitation. That is for the main rendering, not for the interactive. If you want to change it for an interactive render, you can go to the performance tab. Under the interactive rendering, you can see the options that says max passes. So what are the passes? Each pass will going to process the render one step further. So we can limit it, for example, to 20 passes and see what happens. Now you can see it's going to start from 0 and it will end when it reaches 20. Basically, when it reaches 20, it will pause the render, not fully stop it. So it will be on a sleep mode until you move the camera or change something in the scene, then it will start over again. But it will stop at 20 each time, so it prevents your hardware from rendering all day around. Another thing we can add a limit to is the resolution. By default, the resolution of our interactive render is locked to our frame buffer resolution. So if I make it bigger or smaller, or if I maximize my frame buffer, you can see the render starts over. And if you notice on the window tab, you can see the resolution is changing every time. So if I enable this option, I can lock it to a specific resolution that I can type here. And it won't change whatever I do with the frame buffer. Here you can also change the denoising type, so you can select Intel GPU AI or NVIDIA GPU AI, which is NVIDIA one is preferred if you have an NVIDIA card. And you can also check the upscaling, which will render half of your resolution and doubles the size using the AI. Okay, now I want to add a material to my floor. So I'm going to select it, then open my offline Corona material library from the toolbar. Here you can see a list of materials. Let's go to the woods and find a wood plank. There are multiple ways to assign a material to an object. One of them is by dragging and dropping it on the object. As you can see, the material has been applied, but we don't see anything in the render. That's because of the material override. Here you can see if we turn off the material override, there is a material on the floor. Let's say we just want to see the floor material and keep all the materials white as the material override. To do that, we need to add this to an exclusion list. It's like preserving it. So there are two ways to do that. One is to select the object and hit that plus button. It will automatically add it to the exclude list. Or we can open the list and select the object, click on this arrow and add it to the exclude list. Make sure that you name your objects correctly so you can find them easily in this list. Now you can see we can only see our flow material and all of the other materials are still the white override material. A better way to add material to your scene is to use Chaos Cosmos, so you can open it from the toolbar. Here I have already downloaded some materials, so I'm in the downloaded tab. And if I go to the materials and the wood floorings, here I can select and also drag and drop a material to my surface. A more professional way to do this is to open the material library, click and drag your material into the material library and then assign it to your surface. So there will be these steps. Drag your material, select your surface, select your material, and then hit that assign button. Or you can open the material menu and assign the material to the selection from there. In order to add material to the walls and the ceiling, I can safely go on and turn off the material override since we don't need it anymore. Select my wall and ceiling, then do the same process. Open the Chaos Cosmos, go to the walls tab, and from there drag the material to my material library and assign it to the surface. Now let's try the brick category and assign a brick to my wall. As mentioned, let's drag it to the material library and select assign to material. And you might say, wow, this is looking like the end of the Interstellar movie with the library. So this will bring up the UVW map or unwrapping lessons. Okay, so 3ds Max uses a projection system that projects the texture on the object that you've just created and show it to us. It will use the very first type of geometry that you've created as the reference for projecting the texture. So for example, we have a plane here. Whatever we do after creating a plane will not be recognized. So for example, if I make a copy of this and add a shell modifier to it, it won't recognize the walls. It just projects the texture on the top and bottom face of it. But how it is going to project it on it? So it will basically take the source texture and stretch it out to the size of your object. For example, if I create another plane with less width, you can see that the texture is totally distorted and stretched out to the shape of the plane we've created. So despite the fact that our main texture source is a square one with 1:1 aspect ratio, it will just stretch it out to fill your object. So if I apply it to the plane that we added a shell to it, it won't recognize the walls. It will recognize the first base shape that you created. So that will be the top and the bottom plane. Let's draw it to make it easier for you to understand. So this is our texture source, and 3ds Max is getting the data from the texture, from the material, and whatever aspect it has, it will project it and fit it to our 3D model like this. So now it's been projected from top and perpendicular to this plane. So our problem is that we only have one projector and it's projecting from top. So the walls won't get any data from it. What we need here can be called box projection. It means that we should have a projector projecting the texture perpendicular to each face separately. So when we apply a box projection, this is what's happening. We also have another problem to solve, and that's the stretching problem. As I mentioned, we have a source texture with 1:1 aspect ratio here, but when it gets projected to this plane, it will get stretched out to, let's say, 1:15 aspect ratio. So to solve that problem, we can tile the texture on the object. Now let's see how we can do that. Go to the modifier tab and type UV. Here you can see all kind of UVW mapping modifiers. For example, we have unwrap UVW map here for complex shapes, but for now we are going to use UVW map, which is the simplest one for the quickest UVW mapping. So I'm going to select that, and here we can see some modes. Now let's go through the UVW mapping modes. First one is the planar one, which is going to create an imaginary plane and project it from there for one side only. The other one is the box, as I explained. This will also create an imaginary box and project it from those 6 sides. The next one is cylindrical, and the projection size depends on your cylinder size, of course. Another one is the spherical, and this will project it from all sides of a sphere. And there are other options that I will explain to you when I use them. For this one, since it is just a 2D plane, I'm going to select planar. Then I need to assign the length and the width of it. To have a texture size, it's better to play around with it, try different numbers and see which one fits your scene better. But to avoid stretching, we should check the texture aspect ratio first. This texture, we know that it is a 1:1 aspect ratio, so it's a square one. It means that the both numbers for the length and the width should be the same. For this one, I'm trying 200 by 200 centimeters. And as you can see, it will tile it with that same size over and over on the surface. Below the length and width, you can see U, V, and W tiles. These numbers determines that how many times it should be repeated along those U, V, and W axes. The other option is using the real-world map size. If you check this option, it will read the length and the width from the texture settings. So if you go to the material editor and select the texture, we can see the option also in here. If we enable that, we can see that there will be an option to change the length and the width from there also. Some materials that you download may already have the real-world size of the texture in the texture, so you can enable that real-world map size for those materials. Now let's try this for the cube. For this one, of course, I will select box, and this will create simply 6 planar projections. Then I will give it the length and the width, and this time I should add the height also. Here you can see now it is tiled on all sides without distorting and without stretching. Now let's move into the interior and apply what we learned to the walls. Selecting the walls, adding UVW map, select the box mapping, and try out our numbers. It seems like 200 is a little bit off scale for this, so let's reduce the projection size. Maybe 100 or 150. And let's do the same for the ceiling and for the floor. Instead of doing this all over again, I just select the wall, copy the modifier, and paste it in the modifier stack. And I will do the same for the floor and change the number to something that is visually correct. Now that I have correct UVs on my walls, ceiling, and floor, I can now freely apply any kind of materials in Chaos Cosmos. Most of the Chaos Cosmos materials and textures are 1:1 aspect ratios, so you can use the same method for all of those materials. And this will bring us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed the first lesson, and we are going to dive deeper into Corona in the next episode. This episode took hours from me, so a like and a comment from you will keep me motivated to go on. Thank you, and subscribe to see more in the future.